Welcome to Leadership, the Secret Sauce, the podcast where we talk to extraordinary coaches and leaders to dive into the realms of leadership and coaching. We're your hosts, Dave Lipsky and Matt Dodson. So let's jump in with another guest and find out their answer to the question, what is your secret sauce? Welcome back. So we are walking our way through all of the different models in the coaching culture that Dave and I have talked about over the years. And we are on the third model, Model C, the decentralized, the organizational standards. We've talked about Model A, which is sort of the startup and ad hoc, Model B being the decentralized model. And now we're on Model C. Dave, can you tell us a little bit about this? And then we'll get to the questions for it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're moving up the models to more strategic approaches, right? And in this decentralized with organizational standards model, standard vendors and leadership expectations exist, but control remains decentralized. Organizations have consistent qualification requirements like ICF and other certifications, while allowing business unit leaders to approve the actual coaching. So first question. This seems to be like a Goldilocks, or, what model, works for everybody. Not too rigid, not too loose. What's our experience with companies trying to hit this balance?
Well, this is what I would say. It's the business leader or the HR leader that says, hey, what's going on? It seems chaotic. I'm talking leader to leader, and I'm not getting the same types of things. Or it just seems like in that organization, they seem to have these leaders that are experiencing and growth with a lot of coaches. And then the other one, you've got maybe some internal coaches that are just providing feedback. What's going on? It just seems like it seems like chaos. So I think that's kind of the thing that companies try to hit in terms of like, what's happening in the organization? It feels like chaos. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it does, and I've been in this, and it can feel like chaos, right? And I think it's often I have to remind myself to the individual receiving coaching or to a particular business unit or particular region. For them, it's not as chaotic, right? They're experiencing things that work for them. So I start off taking a deep breath, and I try to ask the question, what's happening? What's good here? Like, what's working?
Yeah.
And then the next question I kind of move to is, how might we leverage what's working, right? As opposed to my first gut reaction is, we have to stop this thing because it's not working across the organization. And that's never helped, like, when I've taken that approach. So,
yeah. And I would also say is who is this working for? Oftentimes this is working for the leader themselves because they are getting what they need if they're getting the coaches for those leaders. And if your main point is, hey, we want to help these leaders grow, expand their thinking, trust the coaches so that they can develop and get after what we're looking them to get after, then this works. And then I think it's up to HR and maybe the business leaders to kind of figure out, like, if there is some baseline good enough, or if there's something like that, then maybe on us as the support organization, here I am speaking as an HR person, it's up to us to kind of figure out what organizational standards could look like. So I think it's like, where's your focus? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's important. And we have to, we have to look within our own strategic container, right? Where we're saying, well, what are we trying to accomplish? We want leaders to experience coaching. We want them to become sponsors and advocates of coaching. Well, part of the way that happens is they feel like they have some voice, right, in the selection process and guiding it. So I think we have to remember, as we have the ingredients for the cake, it's never really fully baked until people bring the ingredients that they want to be a part of that cake.
Hmm.
And I think that's sometimes when we forget that, we run into the challenges of having a fixed mindset around what we end up creating.
Yeah. Even the organization responsible for coaching gets a fixed mindset every once in a while. I think
Yep.
that's, like we are not above uh, the fixed mindset of it. It has to be this way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's that's a also effect of the system we're in. Do we report up through people that count more things than do qualitative measurements,
Hmm.
right? And that's part of our role is we have to be able to say sell the learning and adjustment mode and the qualitative measures. And I haven't always been in an organization that's the primary focus. Tell me what you're going to do, how many, and then at the end of the year, you either did it or didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. The counting, I think, is it's an important thing for, I think, for learning and development to to sort of grapple with. Um, Dave, you have a history of talking about like credentials or certification. What have you seen like has what's happened in in putting in organizational standards for certification? This is sort of a loaded topic because I'm intentional. I'm saying certification, not accreditation. So
Yeah, yeah, and I think I'd even go like if there are multiple levels of like what are your standards? Like what's good coaching, what's not,
yeah,
right? What is a good process of coaching that has yielded results, efficacy, right? And what are the good competencies that go into good coaching, right? And I think in terms of accreditation, right, of standardization, of having some qualitative measures of that, it's really important, right? And I think like over time in the last 20 years, that has grown and it can be leveraged in a very positive way, right? Where we're following principles that help us create guidelines within our internal organizations so that we can hold up what is a best practice and that be pretty credible, right, across different organizations, across different countries. That's really helpful. I think we can over index where we go too far and we say, the little c coaching behavior has to follow a certain standard. And I don't think that's good, healthy for organizations either.
yeah. Yeah, you mentioned this idea around credibility or like a certification, lending credibility. Uh, one time, a lady who used to be, well, she became an external coach at one point in time, and she said, "Now that certification may get me into the door, but once they experience coaching, that sort of standard, it really isn't. Now it's just like who knows me." And who has experienced my coaching. But I think for some, when we do an onboarding session, when we did an onboarding session yesterday, like a first um, meet and greet where we talked about ICF, for some engineers in an organization, if they have an engineers or some type of, say it's a medical, a health um, uh, system, those that knowledge, like, hey, look, I'm adhering to the standards and ethics of the European Mentoring and Coaching Council or the International Coach Federation. That lends some credibility. Like, hey, look, this is not just Johnny Coach that adds the word coach to his name, um, hangs a shingle, and he's coming in here for 6 months or whatever it happens to be. So I do think that lends some credibility to the whole practice because I think the practice is still so new, and they still understand coaching to be they've equated it with life coaching still.
Yeah, I think it is like it connects back to some of the stuff we were talking about before of let's say some coaching goes bad, what's the PR that you have to do? And I think it's some of that is contained within the what is coaching and what it's not, right? And some of those definitions and our ability to talk about that, and and how quickly that that definition can go rogue to what we originally intended,
Yeah.
right? As it
Mhm.
spreads across the organization. It's interesting, right? So like, I'm gonna go to like a different question. So like, how do you know what's the right level of standardization,
Mm.
right? Where is the level where it doesn't kill the innovation, but also you don't veer too far off purpose?
Yeah. Well, I with an organization I was in, we said, we want everyone to have had or have been enrolled in a program that provided training and development up to ACC level. And if they went and received coaching from some organization, I had this specifically, someone in Africa had received some coach training, wanted to know if they could be an internal coach. I just said, can you send me the syllabus? And as the sort of the overview of the, for the organizational, for the enterprise of coaching, I looked at it and said, okay, if this is what you've received and you're on your path towards ACC certification, that's good enough. And then we'll try it out and see what a leader says. And if it's not for that means I have to go check with the leader that's receiving the coaching. And I've even had one conversation where someone says, "This is a horrible coach. How could we have this person?" And I was like, "Wait, hold on. It's very possible that this coach is just not the right one for you." And because every coach isn't good for every person. It has to be a match. And so I think that's kind of that's where we went to.
Yeah, I think to your question around, what's the right level of standardization. Um, I do, the challenge I think we have is as you try to democratize, expand, right? It's tougher to manage. So, us having people meet certain standards that are not us checking with that particular client, checking on that particular coach, having to do the training ourselves, right? It expands your capacity to bring coaching into your organization, which I think that's an important one. And then to your point, it's not always those things that make for good chemistry, right? But it is often those things that somebody that can very quickly make a coaching relationship go south, which is somebody coming in wanting to share their own story more than the clients and giving advice, and right, those are the things that I often find don't contribute to the coaching relationship.
Yeah. One of the questions that we had and we wanted to talk about was, hey, what do we do with the beloved coach who doesn't meet the new standards? Um, and sometimes we can just encourage them to revisit their coaching certification or any type of education, encouraging them to continue their development as a coach. I think that also is important if we're going to have internal coaches or coaches that maybe are in the organization and style themselves as a coach, that they would continue to learn. And that means I may have a community of practice where we talk about coaching. We offer coaching, internal coaching, especially if they're not certified, but they're a beloved coach, that we give them that opportunity to get it. So,
Yeah, that is personally that's a really tough one for me because I have had absolutely beloved coaches that just have said, yeah, I don't want to spend the time going for that particular accreditation certification, right?
yeah.
And And I think it's, the ability to, can you hear me okay, Matt? Okay. Yeah. So it leads to some, you know, challenging things. And in that particular case, it's offering development, offering support, but also knowing that it's a coach's choice, right? And that's what we can do is offer it, but then also finding space for that coach in other areas, and other work that you.
Dave, as you're talking, it reminds me that this is in our model C. This is when you really start to get a center of excellence, and where that person that's responsible for enterprise coaching now almost acts as a supervisor. So instead of just monitoring, gathering metrics, getting insight, sharing that with HR, those types of things, now all of a sudden you have the role of almost mentor, coach, and gathering metrics. When you have said, hey, we're going to have standards, now all of a sudden we're adding another component where that person is now evaluating the current coaches or internal coaches or people that want to be coaches and saying, hey, look, this is what good looks like. That mention of, hey, this is what good looks like requires, or it puts the importance on the manager of enterprise coaching to evaluate those people and have those tough conversations to say, hey, I think you need to continue your development, or, read this book and see if this changes, or let's make sure that you get to go to our internal accreditation program.
Yeah, this brings me to like a situation that I had, which was for one of the, you know, Fortune 50 organizations that had an existing set of coaches and facilitators that just knew the long history of the organization, and then new standards bringing in new program, and there was an interesting blend that had to occur where the people with newer standards needed to learn the company stories to have credibility, and then the existing coaches needed to adapt to some of the newer standards, right? So it turned out to be a very nice blend of individuals working together to support each other. And so I think like we need to look at this as opportunities, but then also a question, right, is how does an organization, balance global standards with local cultural needs? And with the local cultural needs, I'll say also like that organizational history piece, I'll add to that cultural need bucket.
Yeah, especially if I would say it's on an operational side and they need some of that more, hey, look, I need something more tangible. I also need the behavioral coaching and advice giving. If it's a safety related, I've seen this especially on safety related type of coaching where the person is a leadership coach and has that safety component too. They need to be willing to. I think I think of somebody from our podcast a ways back, Ed Piccolino, who really said, hey, look, the higher you go in the organization, the less likely someone's really to give you advice. And so I see sometimes coaching as the coaches need to provide the willingness to give the advice to the whatever that leader is. So I do think that comes into play here, where those internal coaches or the organization has that tough.
Yeah, no, I do. It's a mix of things, right? Because when you bring up safety standards, then you're in a category of things that are must do, not right, not a choice to do. And in coaching, it's a very interesting value like we profess is, it's always a choice for the client. But then sometimes the areas that we're trying to move forward, like safety, right, there's a mix of things that people need to adapt to a set of standards that are critical for the organization. Not the topic necessarily of coaching, but some of the outcomes of like moving that forward organizationally. So it's never a black or white decision. I think we're always trying to balance that out.
Oh,
But what happens when business unit leaders push back against organizational standards? What do you say to those folks, Matt?
I won't say too bad. I would say, hey, look, we're trying to raise our bar in terms of get to that place. I think your story is a unique one in terms of you have your coach competence on both sides, and you're trying to raise all the boats and try to raise the level of quality where someone would say, hey, look, if so one of the issues in it, so say you have internal coaching or just that whatever your mosaic of coaching happens to be, is that internal coaching needs to be of a quality as well that people will trust it. And that is like this sacred thing in terms of on inside of internal coaching. And if your leaders say, hey, look, I'm going to push back, we want them to have the coach that they really trust. And we believe it's not either or. And we believe that just this is the minimum that we expect that leader to be headed towards. In terms of if they are moving towards certification, they are going to need to get there. We're going to be able to provide a certain number of 100 hours in order for them to get their certification hours. So we don't want to limit that. And we think that's really important so that they can be evaluated by an independent organization to say, hey, look, you meet at least the competence standards.
Yeah, what you said reminds me that what I learned from a really good marketing professional is you have to you have to remember when you're managing the brand, right? The value proposition of what something is, and the consistency of that value proposition, right? Of what coaching is and what people experience, and the importance of that as you grow, right? Where you can't control the experience if it's just you doing the coaching versus you're expanding out. And then as we move, right, to managing the brand, we start to think about coaching and what impact it could have. We move to the next model of coaching, centralized with organizational competence. And Matt, what is that like as you think about this next model, centralized with organizational competence? What differentiates that? What does it look like?
Well, this is so I like this model, especially. I think this is a very mature organization, especially if it's a manufacturing organization. I think this is where you find integration between the learning and development and HR, if they're separated in any way. But they're really saying, hey, look, this is a way that we're measuring, we're adding value to the business. And our HR processes are included and supportive of the leaders that need coaching. I also think it's moving towards this place where coaching is becoming a part of how we develop our leaders. And it may be like the standard, like how we're developing, because of the bespoke nature or the unique needs of a leader, and how we've moved away towards whether that's sheep dipping or whatever you call it, everybody through a supervisor program. And maybe that's helpful, but we've now said, hey, look, this is how we see leaders continuing to develop in the future. All right. And until next time, we'll see you then. Thanks for listening. If you love this podcast, please share it with another coach or leader. Make sure you go to the show notes to get all the resources from today's episode.